The Detroit Lions have had to fight through a lot of adversity this season, and in particular, a lot of adversity on the defensive side of the ball. They've lost their star edge rusher, Aiden Hutchinson, with a gruesome leg injury for the remainder of the season. Last week in Lambeau, they lost their star Defensive Player of the Year candidate in Brian Branch to an ejection. They've lost 5 defensive starters to injury reserve, as well as several other players like Josh Paschal and Mekhi Wingo, missing games here and there sprinkled throughout the season. That certainly hurts the Detroit Lions even more. However, despite all those injuries and despite the adversity that the Detroit Lions have faced, their defense still stands as one of the best in football. Their secondary ranks second in a lot of major statistical categories, while their run defense still ranks among the top 10 units in the NFL, while playing backups at 2, if not 3, defensive lineman positions at a time throughout the game. So today we're going to take a look at the Detroit Lions and not only how good they've been on defense despite having to rely on quite a bit of their depth, but today we're going to take a look at the starters that are returning. Because over the next couple of months, from now in November to the early weeks of January, the Detroit Lions could return not 1, not 2, but 5 defensive starters and playmakers that would really improve and boost the talent level among this defense and give the Detroit Lions a true shot at a deep playoff run and a Super Bowl. So, with that being said, let's take a look starting off with the Lions defense as they rank today. Now, as I mentioned, the Detroit Lions have been through a lot, right? As of right now and as of last week, the Lions' edge rushing rotation was Isaiah Thomas and James Houston. Those 2 players ranked as the 96th and 98th ranked defensive ends in football last week out of 98 possible defensive ends. They had 2 of the 3 worst players at their position on the defensive line a week ago. They lost Brian Branch to an injury. They lost Carlton Davis for part of the game during the injury, and that is not an uncommon thing. Josh Paschal has missed the last 2 games. Mekhi Wingo was unavailable for that game. Derek Barnes, of course, has missed a large part of the season at Sam linebacker. They are relying on a lot of backups and a lot of their depth right now, and yet they still rank very highly among the NFL in a lot of categories. Overall, in yards allowed, they rank 13th in the NFL, still within the top half after losing all of those players. Their passing defense does rank 23rd in the NFL in passing yards allowed, and their rushing defense is still among the top of the league, ranking 7th. They rank 5th in the NFL in scoring defense, and even going into the passing defense, when you look a bit closer, they aren't very bad. Yes, they rank 23rd in yards allowed, but they rank 13th in completion percentage. They rank 2nd in the NFL in touchdowns allowed. They've allowed just 6 touchdowns through the air this season, which is less than 1 passing touchdown per game on the defense. They're 2nd in the NFL in interceptions, walking away with 11 already this season, which again is very, very top of the NFL, only behind Minnesota. And they rank 7th in the NFL in passes defended. So yeah, while they're going to give up a lot of yards, they don't give up a high completion percentage. They don't give up touchdowns, and they take away the football more than just about any team in football. And when you consider the fact that they are one of the most passed upon defenses in the NFL, largely because they are winning a lot of games by a large margin, it would make sense that the Lions give up a lot of yards, right? When you're up by 2, 3 scores in the NFL, the other team's going to pass a lot. The other team is going to throw the ball to try to get back in the game. And while the Lions defense has been content allowing some of those short yardage receptions, they've been, capable of allowing some of those completions and a lot of passing yards in a game statistically. A lot of those passing yards come in garbage time. A lot of those passing yards come when the Lions are winning by 2, 3, even 4 scores on the offensive side of the ball. So they're content with allowing those yards underneath and, allowing teams to kind of run their own clock at their own risk. Now, taking a look at the Detroit Lions secondary, they've got quite a few good players. Carlton Davis, I think, is playing very well, has only really struggled in 1 or 2 games this season, especially against Seattle. But ever since then, he has been a very, very good cornerback for the Detroit Lions. Terrion Arnold is developing. He had quite a slow start to his NFL career, but over the last 2 to 3 weeks has been really, really good for the Detroit Lions defense. And I don't even know if he was tested even once last weekend in Green Bay. Amik Robertson has been a phenomenal slot player, was great in Green Bay a week ago. He was, fantastic in the run game and, of course, very scrappy in the passing attack. Kirby Joseph is having an elite season as he leads the NFL in interceptions. And we already talked about Brian Branch being one of the league's best safeties and potentially being their defensive player of the year candidate now that Aiden Hutchinson is no longer available. However, despite this secondary already being quite good, they're expected to return not one but two defensive players in the secondary, with Ifeatu Melifanu and Emmanuel Mosley both having their 21-day practice window opened. And despite neither of them being very likely to return by week 10 versus Houston, there's a chance that they return for week 11, if not week 12, and play the last month and a half of the regular season and are healthy for the NFL playoffs. Taking a look at Ifeatu Melifonwu first, he was amazing last year for the Detroit Lions. In 6 starts at the Detroit Lions' primary strong safety position, Ifeatu Melifonwu recorded 33 tackles, 4 tackles for loss, 3 sacks, 8 passes defended, a forced fumble, and 2 interceptions. One of those interceptions came in Minnesota as the Detroit Lions sealed their NFC North championship against the Minnesota Vikings in 2023. Not to mention, Ifeatu Melifonwu went on to have a very strong playoff performance as well in his 3 games. He forced several pass incompletions, as well as being a massive contributor to the blitz, as well as, of course, in the secondary. He is a versatile, athletic piece who, despite not really being able to be healthy for a majority of his career, has been incredibly impactful in the time that he has been on the field, and we saw that in spades just a year ago as he was a starter for the Lions. Now, adding Ifeatu Melifonwu means the Detroit Lions might have the best safety trio in the NFL. They already have the best safety duo, but adding of Ifeatu Melifonwu, a player that last year had 8 passes defended and 2 interceptions, to a safety duo of Brian Branch, who has 11 passes defended and 4 picks this year, as well as Kirby Joseph, who has 8 passes defended and 6 interceptions this year, that would almost certainly give the Detroit Lions the best safety trio in football. It would allow the Detroit Lions to run even more 3 safety sets than they have been, which is something Aaron Glenn has loved to do in the past. And it opens up this defensive playbook even more than it has already been. Now, adding Emmanuel Mosley could have just as large of an effect. Through his last 16 games with the 49ers, he was targeted 82 times, but only allowed 49 catches. That is a 59% completion percentage when targeted. He did allow 478 yards, but 0 touchdowns through the air with 2 takeaways. Emmanuel Mosley is a big, physical press man cornerback. He was supposed to be the number 1 cornerback last year. He was supposed to be the starting slot cornerback this year, and unfortunately, he has suffered through injuries over the last couple of years. He has yet to be healthy for more than a single game for the Detroit Lions, but going back to what we saw in San Francisco, this guy was physical. He was scrappy. He was going toe-to-toe with DK Metcalf. He was going toe-to-toe with some very big, very strong, very physical wide receivers. And not only was he competing, but he was winning a lot of those matchups. I don't know if Emmanuel Mosley will slide into a starting role. I'm not sure if he will slide in and get some reps at slot cornerback and take away time from Amik Robertson. But what I do know is that adding Emmanuel Mosley will give the Detroit Lions a pretty significant boost in talent and depth to their secondary, and would make the secondary look something like this, with Carlton Davis and Terrion Arnold still as the primary starters, but your depth now consisting of Amik Robertson, Ennis Rakestraw Jr., Emmanuel Mosley, and Kendall Vildor. Your number 6 cornerback was a starter for you last year. That is how deep this secondary is at this point in the season and will be when Emmanuel Mosley returns. And yeah, while Emmanuel Mosley might not have an immediate impact and Ifeatu Melifonwu might not have the immediate impact as a starter, both of them will add significant depth to the secondary, both at safety and at cornerback. And as we go through the season, as we approach the playoff, that kind of depth is not something that many teams are afforded. That kind of depth and getting deeper at your secondary at not 1 but 2 positions is not common among the NFL as the playoffs approach. And that is going to be a massive upgrade for the Detroit Lions. Now, the title of this video and the thumbnail of this video says 5 starters. We've talked about 2. So where do the other 3 come from? Well, over the next couple of months, from right now on November 8th to the beginning of January and going into the playoffs, the Detroit Lions have added Zadarius Smith, who was one starter, right? They added him at the trade deadline. They are adding him to the defense from now on. Broderick Martin is potentially returning as early as next week for the Detroit Lions as they go into week 11. And while Broderick Martin likely will not be a starter, there is a lot of hope and a lot of hype around the former third round selection that after a strong preseason, the Detroit Lions and Brad Holmes seem to like him quite a bit, and they could potentially work him in on the rotation for obvious rushing downs. So again, probably won't be a starter, but I do think will be impactful when he returns. Emmanuel Mosley will return as a depth cornerback, but could potentially be a starter in the nickel where he was supposed to be this season. Ifeatu Melifonwu was a starting safety last year, and again, will probably not start games over Brian Branch and Kirby Joseph, but will play a significant amount of snaps in those three safety sets, so will still be very impactful as a starting-esque role. And then John Kaminsky is a player that has not played this season. I believe he ruptured his MCL, or I believe tore his MCL at the beginning of the season, but there was talks that he could potentially return as early as the second week of January and could potentially return as a player that, as the Detroit Lions get into the playoffs, could add even more pass rushing depth and pass rushing juice. And well, yeah, John Kaminsky is not Aiden Hutchinson. John Kaminsky is not an elite pass rusher. This is a player that over the last two seasons has provided 6 sacks for the Lions, has been a glue guy, has been a great run defender, and a player that just would be awesome to have back on that defensive line. And then, of course, there's the rumors that if the Detroit Lions do make it to the Super Bowl, Aiden Hutchinson might come back. He might return after his fractured leg to the Super Bowl if the Lions make it that far. So potentially upwards of 6 starters to reinforce this defense as we go through. And even if they don't start, right? Even if they don't, technically play the first snap of every single game, these players will be impactful when they return. Zadarius Smith will almost certainly take on the edge rusher one role as soon as he gets here. Broderick Martin, I think, will be a pretty valuable rotational piece on the interior of that defensive line to give a break to DJ Reader, who's only playing about 55% of the snaps right now for the Detroit Lions, and Aleem McNeil. Emmanuel Mosley could potentially slide in as a starter and play some significant time in the slot. Ifeatu Melifonwu will almost certainly get a lot of looks in both blitz packages, potentially even sliding in as a weak-sided linebacker at times like he did last year, as well as a deep safety role in 3 safety sets. John Kaminsky will be a very strong rotational piece for the Detroit Lions when he returns in January. And then, of course, Aiden Hutchinson, if he's allotted to return, would be massive for the Detroit Lions in their biggest game in franchise history. So, with that being said, the Lions are in a unique situation. They are not only one of the best teams in football, not only playing some of the best defense in football, but now as the months go on, it could add upwards of 2 playmakers and 2 impactful players a month as we move forward post trade deadline. Now, there's also rumors that the Lions might be interested in Yannick Ngakoue to add to the defense, but that is a topic for another video. So, with that being said, that is all I have for you guys today. Let me know down in the comments below your opinions of these players coming back. Which players do you think will be very impactful? Which players do you think might slide a little bit more under the radar as just some depth pieces? And how do you feel about the Detroit Lions adding this kind of talent over the next 2 months of football to be played? I'm curious to hear what you guys have to say. But with that being said, that's all I got for you guys right now. Thank you all so much for watching. And until next time, and as always, go Lions.